How to sew the Shapely shoulder bag set. Available in these 3 beautiful prints. The Shapely set includes a shoulder bag with a curved bottom, adjustable strap, pockets and a choice of 2 different closures. When you get your kit home, open it out and cut around the very edge of all the fabric pieces. All the seam allowances are included in the pieces, so all you need to do is cut around the outer lines. Cut out the label that's above every single piece and pin it to the top of each piece to remind you when you're assembling the bag later. When you cut out the bag front and back outers and the linings, leave the corner dart sections untrimmed for now, but just cut roughly around them. Making the shoulder bag. Let's start by making the strap. Take one bag strap tab outer and one bag strap tab lining and place them right sides facing. Pin them together across along the top long edge and then along the bottom long edge. Now sew them together down both long edges, leaving the short edges unstitched. Once this is done, you need to turn the tube right sides out. I've used a turning tool for that, just because it's a bit quicker. To do that, put the tube inside, poke the stick through, and the tube turns right sides out. Now roll it so that the seams are lying right on the edges and then top stitch down both long edges to neaten and decorate. Repeat this to make the other bag strap tab in exactly the same way. Now take a D-ring and thread the bag strap tab through this. This is if you're making the magnetic closure. For the zip closer, just leave the D-ring out for now. But for the magnetic closures, stitch this together along the edge to hold the D-ring in place and repeat with the other bag strap tab. Now we're going to make the bag strap. Take the bag strap outer and turn the one of the short ends over to the wrong side by 1/2 inch and press. Then pin into place. Repeat this on the other short end. Take the bag strap lining and do the same on the short ends of that, turning so all the ends are turned under by 1/2 inch. Now take the bag strap lining and the bag strap outer and place them right sides facing, matching up those folded under short ends. Pin into place, making sure those short ends stay folded under and that both pieces are right sides facing. Now pin them together all the way along the length and sew, but make sure those short ends stay turned under. Once you've sewn them together down both long edges, press the seams open. It's fiddly to press them completely open, so if you just press the top seam allowance over to one side, that's enough. Once this is done, you can turn the whole strap right sides out. Again, I used the turning tool to do this because it's just a bit quicker. Once it's all turned right sides out, give it a good press so that all the seams are lying right on the edges. Now top stitch down all the way round, down the long sides, across the short sides and up the other long side again. This just holds the 2 layers together to neaten it and adds a little decoration too. Making the darts. Take the bag front outer and the bag back outer and place them right sides up on top of the wadding. I've used a cotton wadding here. You can use any wadding you like, fusible or non-fusible. Smooth them out to remove all of the lumps and creases and sew them in place all the way around the edges of the darted corners as well. If you're using an iron-on wadding, you can just press them into place. Once you've sewn them into place all the way around, then trim the wadding so that it is level with the edges of the fabric all the way round. Start with the bag front outer. If you've pressed your wadding into place, then you will still need to cut round it to trim. Now when you get to those corner dart sections, cut round the edges of the printed lines. The reason we didn't do it earlier, it's easier to sew or press the wadding on without the little dart sections and then cut them out later. So just cut them along those outer lines. You're cutting out little triangle shapes that will give your bag some shape when it's assembled. Once you get to the other dart, cut that out carefully in the same way, making sure that you just cut along those outer lines. And then finish to trim it all the way up the other side. Now, to actually make the dart, fold the darted corner right sides facing, making sure those raw edges match up, and pop a pin in. You're now going to sew the dart together. So starting at the edge, using a 1/4 inch seam allowance and reverse stitching, sew together from the edge and then all the way down the fold. There are many different ways to finish a dart. Because this is just a bag and it's wadded, you won't notice it so much. I just do a reverse stitch just to make sure it's extra secure. Once you've created the dart, press it to one side. It can be towards the centre or towards the outer, it doesn't really matter. And repeat that to make the other dart in the same way. Sew the darts in the bag back outer in exactly the same way. Then take the two lining pieces and the bag back lining and the bag front lining and sew the darts in those two pieces in exactly the same way to finish all of your darts. Making the pockets. To make a pocket, take the bag inside pocket front and on the wrong side, measure 1 1/4 inches down from the top long edge and 1 1/4 inches down a little bit further down. Now, join those lines up with a ruler. Now mark 1/4 inch to the left of that drawn line and 1/4 inch to the right of the drawn line. And again, using your ruler, join these lines up. Now turn it round, fold it in half to find the centre point of these lines, and just finger press that so you know where it is. Now you need those 3 lines that you've drawn, they need to measure 6 inches long and be placed centrally. So if you measure 3 inches to the right and 3 inches to the left of that centre crease, then you'll know it's in the centre. Draw a vertical line through them and then draw little diagonal lines that go from the corners to the centre. These are going to be your cutting lines. Now take the bag back lining, because this is for the lining pocket that we're making now. Fold it in half and make a crease so that you can find the centre. Pop a pin in so you can find it easily. Now measure and mark 1 inches down from the top. Place your pocket so that the centre line on the pocket matches the marked centre line on the bag, and pin into place. Now pin this pocket just around the edges of the marked line, because you're going to sew along the outer lines. So you can see that the pocket lining is right sides facing onto the bag back lining. Now stitch together all around the outer marked box, not the diagonal lines or the centre line. Remove the pins, and now we're going to cut out the post box opening for the zip. So fold it in half just so you can get started, and make a little snip through all layers of fabric, the back fabric and the pocket fabric. Open it back up. Now cut very carefully using a small sharp pair of scissors along the central line, stopping at the end of those diagonal lines, and then snip along the diagonal lines into the corner. Take care you don't cut the stitching, so just cut just inside it. If you do, don't worry, just pop it back under the machine and redo it. But cut along from that centre point you started with, all the way along the line again, and along those little diagonal points. That helps the post box to open nice and flat in a minute. Now open up these seam allowances and press them flat. You'll get it's a lot easier when you turn it right sides out in a minute, if you've got them nice and flat at this stage. Including those little corner triangles, open those up as well. And the one on the other side. Once that's done, post the pocket lining through to the back of the bag back lining and arrange it so it's lying flat and wrong sides together, so that the inside pocket front is laying wrong sides together with the bag back lining, just like this. It'll take a little bit of fiddling about, but you need to try and make sure that that seam is lying right on the edge and everything's flat, and give it a press. Once that's done, take your zip and place it underneath the pocket opening so the zip teeth are exactly in the centre, and pin into place. You'll notice that I've used a zip that's a lot longer than I need, because that's easier at this stage, because you can cut and trim it later. Also, the slider you can't see at all underneath, because it's easier to get it nice and straight if the slider is sitting off to the left, and we'll move it in a minute. If you prefer, you can use a fabric glue, like a sew-line glue, to glue the zip in place if you prefer. I'm just pinning it for now. So pin it into place across the top and the bottom edge, always making sure that those teeth are lying nice and straight. Pin the zip tape as well that goes beyond the pocket, outside it. That will just keep it straight, because now we're going to move the slider. Just push the slider all the way along until you can see it through the post box opening. Now you can see it. So now the slider's in the right place, but the zip tape is nice and straight. You can pop a pin in at the end, but by keeping the zip closed at either end of it, it's easier to get it all straight. Now top stitch all the way around the edge of this post box opening. Use a zip foot on your machine, and if you line up the edge of your foot with the folded under edge of the fabric where that seam is, you'll get a nice neat finish. When you sew across the end of the zip, because I've used a nylon zip, you can just sew straight through it. It won't affect the teeth. If you've used a metal zip, you'll have to lift up the zipper foot and jump over it. But with a nylon coil zip, you can just sew straight over them. So when you get to each of the corners, pivot, remove the pins, and then sew down. And you can see that I'm lining up the edge of my zip foot with that seamed edge to keep everything nice and straight. When you reach the slider, keep the needle down, raise the foot, move the slider out of the way, put the foot back down, and you can continue sewing. By making sure that the needle always stays in the fabric when you do this, then nothing will move about and you'll continue having a straight seam. Just keep removing the pins as you go. When you get to the other end, again, leave the needle in the fabric, raise the presser foot, turn the fabric round, put the foot back down, and again, sew over the end of the zip. Turn in the same way at the other end. So as long as you take this nice and slowly and you've carefully pinned your zip into place, it's really easy to put a zip in this way. Again, move the zip slider out of the way, always making sure that you keep your needle down in the fabric. Once you get to the other end, just do a reverse stitch just to secure the thread, and you've got a really neatly inserted zip. Take it out from under the machine. Now obviously you can see your zip is too long, so just trim off the ends so that they are within the edge of the fabric so they don't get caught in the next seam. Now take the bag inside pocket back and place it right sides facing with the bag inside pocket front. They're exactly the same size, so this is quite easy. Match up the raw edges all the way around and sew together, making sure you don't sew into the bag lining at all and only through the two pocket pieces. Now you've got a really neatly inserted zip in your bag lining. You can, if you want, put a zip inside the bag outer, a pocket in the side of the bag outer in exactly the same way, either the outer front or the outer back, whichever you prefer, or leave it out if you'd rather. Assembling the bag. Now at this stage, you can choose whether to give your bag a simple closure, which has a magnetic snap to keep the bag closed, or you can insert a zip into the top edge for a more secure closure. Follow the correct instructions for the closure you choose. I'm going to start by showing you the magnetic snap closure. If you prefer to do the zip closure, then just skip forward to that section. Adding the magnetic snap closure. Take the bag front lining and fold it in half to make a centre crease and turn it over onto the wrong side. Just mark where that centre crease is. Now measure 1.5 inches down from the top and make a mark. Make a little cross where those 2 points join. Take the back plate of the male section and put the hole that's in the middle of it over that little cross, and then draw through the 2 slits. You now need to cut along these slits. A seam ripper is ideal for this because you can poke it in and then cut the hole, but use a small pair of scissors if you don't have one of these. Now take a piece of wadding, about 1.5 inches square is good, and draw the slits on in the centre in the same way as you did with the lining, and then cut along them. This extra piece of wadding will make the magnetic snap more secure and stop the fabric from tearing when you open and close it all the time. Now, take the male section of the magnetic snap and push the prongs through from the right side of the fabric through those little slits you made through to the wrong side of the fabric, and then turn it over. Take the piece of wadding and put it through the prongs. Now take the washer that comes with it, the magnetic snap, and place that over the prongs so the wadding is sandwiched between, and then push the prongs outwards to secure. That's the male half attached. Now repeat this to attach the female section of the magnetic clasp to the other piece of lining, the one that you've got the pocket on. Again, fold it in half to find the centre. Measure 1.5 inches down from the top. Don't worry, that will sit above the zip. If you haven't added a pocket, don't worry, you attach it in exactly the same way. But if you have added a pocket, then the snap will go through all 3 layers. Draw the vertical lines again. Then take your seam ripper or a small pair of scissors and cut through all those layers. If you have added a pocket, you need to make sure you cut through all layers of the pocket, 2 pocket pieces and the bag lining. Take a square of wadding again, put the washer in the middle and draw over through the lines. Then cut along them in exactly the same way as you did when you attached the male half. So take the female section of the magnetic clasp, push the prongs through the holes. You can see it's sitting neatly above the zip. Once you've got all the prongs through, if you've got the pocket, you'll need to wiggle them through a bit because you've got extra layers. Take the wadding, pop that over the prongs, and take the back plate, put that over the prongs, and then fold the prongs outwards to secure. Now you've got your 2 magnetic closures attached. So take the bag front outer and the bag back outer and place them right sides facing and pin together all the way around the edge. You need to pin and sew together down the sides and across the bottom, not across the top. Now when you get to the darts, arrange them so they're facing in opposite directions. This means they'll nest together a bit more neatly. If you pin together at the dart sections, then between, it's better. It just reduces the bulk a little bit if your darts are facing in opposite directions at this stage. And then pin together at the top of the other side. Then sew together all the way around, but leaving the top open. Once you've done this, take the bag lining pieces and do exactly the same. The only thing you need to make sure this time is you leave a 4-inch gap unstitched in the bottom, because this is where the turning gap will be. Assembling the bag. Take the bag outer that you've sewn together, the front outer and the back outer, and turn it right sides out. Push your hands in the bottom to make sure the seams are lying on the edge. Now take one bag strap tab, the one that you put the D-rings through earlier, and place it centrally on top of one of the side seams. But before you do that, measure and mark with a pin 1/2 inch down from the top of the strap. And just pop a pin through that mark. Now place it centrally across one of the side seams. Make sure the seam is open and place it so that 1/2 inch of the strap tab is sticking above the bag, which is where the pin mark is. The reason you do this is it makes it more secure. When you're carrying lots of things in your bag, it can easily pull out if you don't have this extending. Tack that into in place along the edge, and tack it a little bit further down as well, just to make sure it stays straight during assembly. Then repeat that to tack the other strap tab to the other side. Now take the bag lining and place the bag outer inside the bag lining so that they are right sides facing. Match up the side seams. Make sure the D-ring is facing downwards. It'll be well out of the way of this seam. So match up the side seams. By pushing a pin through, you can make sure that they're in the right place, that one seam matches up to the other. And then put a pin through horizontally and then remove that vertical pin. Now turn it around, making sure the D-ring is facing downwards. match up the other side seam. The seam can be open or to one side on the lining. It doesn't really matter because it's not that much bulk. It's better if it's facing, if the seam is open on the outer fabric because of the wadding. Then pin together the side seams. Once that's done, pin it together all the way around the top edge, making sure all the raw edges of the outer and the lining match up. The pocket and the magnetic snap will be well out of the way of this seam because it's been positioned in such a way that you can sew it together easily. Take care to make sure all the raw edges match up as you're pinning it together all the way around. Now stitch together all the way around this top edge. Once this is done, put your hand inside, pull the outer to the outside, and then open up the seam that was along the top and press it flat. By doing this, you'll find it easier to get the seam lying at the top edge when you top stitch it later, particularly because you've got the wadding in it. So open it up with your fingers and then use an iron to press it flat. Now put your hand inside the turning gap in the lining, grab hold of one of the bottom corners of the bag and turn the whole bag right sides out through that gap. Pull it gently all the way through. And then push out all of those corners and curves because it's easier to do this before you sew the turning gap closed. Now fold the edges of the turning gap under by 1/4 inch all the way along and pin them into place. Now sew together across the edge to close the turning gap. Once that's done, push the lining inside the outer, making sure all the lining's right inside so all the corners match up, and then before you do the top stitching, remove that second lining of tacking. You know, the one that you added earlier, just to make sure that the tabs stayed straight while you were sewing the top seam. Just remove that now because these tabs need to be facing upwards. Now take out all the tacking stitches. Now you're going to top stitch all around the top edge, so make sure the seam on that top is lying exactly on the edge, giving it a good press to be sure. The aim here is that the lining doesn't show from the outer side and the outer doesn't show from the lining side. Make sure the tabs are facing upwards and then top stitch all the way around the edge. Putting in the zip closure. Start by inserting the zip. Place the bag front outer right side up and then measure and mark 3/4 inch in from the left hand side and mark this with a pen. Now make another mark 1 inch from the right hand side and mark this with a pen. Now take your zip and place it right sides down on top of the bag front outer and undo it all the way to the end. Fold the end of the zip tape upwards so that the folded end is sitting on top of the zip and pin it into place. Now the metal end of the zip, you see the little metal closure there, that needs to sit on that 3/4 inch mark. So make sure the metal end is sitting exactly in that place. Then pin the edge of the zip tape to the top of the bag so that the edge of the zip tape is matching up exactly with the raw edges of the back, and the metal end is sitting on that 3/4 inch mark. Now pin the zip tape into place all the way along the top of the bag outer, making sure that the edge of the zip tape and the raw edge of the bag match up exactly. You'll notice that the end of the zip extends beyond the end of the top outer. That's how it should do. Pin it all the way along, right to the end. Now find where you mark the bag with that 1 inch mark and mark the same position on the top of the zip tape. That's where we're going to stop sewing. Make sure, double check that the metal end of the zip is 3/4 inch from the end, and sew it into place. Just tack it into place about 1/8 inch in from the edge all the way along, stopping at that mark position. Now take the bag front lining and place it right sides down on top. The zip will be sandwiched between the front outer and the front lining. Make sure that the raw edge of the lining and the outer all match up exactly. Because you've already tacked the zip into place, this will be easy to do because the zip won't shift. Pin it into place all the way along the top edge. Move the zip slightly out of the way so that you can just pin it to the top edge. Now take your tape measure again and a pen and mark 1 inch in from the right hand side, and mark this onto the wrong side of the lining fabric. Now measure 1/4 inch to the right of this so that you've got two marks, one 1 inch from the edge and one that's 3/4 inch from the edge. Now sew it into place all the way along, stopping exactly at that 1 inch mark. Once this is sewn in place, reverse stitch at that 1 inch mark. You can see I've stopped exactly there. Now fold the zip downwards, moving the tape completely out of the way. If you pin it into place, it will hold it while you're sewing. Now take the lining and pin it back into place across the top. Just pin it at the end. Now you're going to start stitching from that second mark, the one that's 1/4 inch from the first one, and sew it to the end. The zip tape won't get caught in because you've left that 1/4 inch gap, but just make sure as you're sewing that it's not caught in. There you can see I've sewn that piece and the zip tape isn't caught at all in that section. This will allow your bag to open really nicely when it's finished. Now open it up and place the lining and the outer so they are wrong sides facing. You now need to sew the bag back outer and the bag back lining to the other side of the zip tape in exactly the same way, but swapping the fabrics round so you're stitching from the same end of the zip as you started with when attaching the bag front outer. To do this, mark the bag back lining 3/4 inch in to the right of the left side of the top edge, and place another mark 1 inch in to the left of the right side of the top edge of the bag back lining. Close the zip and turn it around so the bag front is right sides up. Now fold the end of the zip tape under this time. So the zip tape is underneath and is on top, and the folded under edge is underneath, right up by that metal stop, and pin it into place. Now with the zip right sides up, pin it into place so that that metal end is right on that 3/4 inch mark that you placed earlier on the bag lining. You're just doing this the opposite way round when you put in the first half of the zip, because it's easier to start stitching at the open end of the zip and finish stitching at the closed end. So you have to do it in reverse this time. So again, match up the edge of the zip tape to the top edge of the fabric and pin it into place all the way along. In the same way as you did before, mark onto the zip tape 1 inch in from the edge, in the same place as you put the marking on the actual lining, and check again that that metal end is 3/4 inch in from the left hand side. Now stitch it into place, just tack 1/8 inch from the edge to hold the zip tape in place, and start stitching at the beginning and stop stitching at that 1 inch mark. Take the bag back outer and place it right sides facing on top, so that the lining and the outer are right sides facing and the zip is sandwiched in between. Open up the zip all the way along to the edge and pin it into place along, just moving the zip tape out of the way. You'll be moving this later because we're going to sew it together in exactly the same way as we did the other side of the bag. Make sure all those raw edges are matching. Now stitch it together. Put another pin in. It's important to make sure it's nice and straight. Now, again, mark onto the wrong side of the bag front, the bag outer, 1 inch from the edge, and then 1/4 inch in from that. So one mark is 1 inch from the edge, one mark is 3/4 inch from the edge. Now using the 1/4 inch seam allowance again, sew the zip into place, stopping and reverse stitching at that 1 inch mark, as I've done here. Move the zip tape well out of the way and then pin the outer and the line together. If you pin the zip out of the way, it does help to keep it in place. Pin the outer and the lining together at the end. Now, as you did before, start stitching at that second mark and end at the end, making sure the zip tape doesn't get caught in that seam. Now that's done, you can see the zip tape isn't caught at all, so you can remove that pin. And now it's a good idea at this stage to open everything out and do up the zip, and you can see how it all works now. Do up the zip, but don't top stitch like you normally would do for a bag. Don't top stitch, we'll do that later. Making sure the linings and the outers are all wrong sides facing, and that's the neatly inserted zip. Assembling the bag. Open up the zip halfway, then pin the fabrics together so that the bag outer fabrics are right sides facing and the bag lining fabrics are right sides facing. Measure, take the lining fabric and fold it in half in the centre. If you match up the darts and make a small crease, you can find the centre. You need to mark a 4 inch turning gap in the centre of the bottom. So if you put your tape measure 2 inches, put the 2 inch mark on the crease, then measure 2 inches one side, 2 inches the other side. That's the 4 inch turning gap that you're going to be leaving in the bottom of the lining. Now pin together all the way around. Match the darts on the lining and pin them together. Match the other set of darts on the lining. By matching the darts first, you know that you've got it all placed exactly. And then pin together. If you place these turning gap pins vertically like this, then you'll remember to stop and start stitching and leaving that gap unstitched. Now pin it together all the way round. Make sure you match up these side seams exactly. This is easier to do than a normal bag that has a zip across all the way across the top, because you haven't got to sew into the zip at all. So measure at those side seams. You've obviously got the end of the zip sticking out. Tuck that to the inside. It's important that that zip doesn't get caught in the seam at all. So once that's tucked neatly to the inside, match up those seams again and pin them together. Then match up the darts in the two outer pieces. If you fold the seam allowances for the darts in opposite directions, they'll nest together neatly, and you'll also reduce the bulk in this area. Otherwise you'd have 4 layers of fabric and wadding together. So just push them apart, paste them in opposite directions, and then they'll nest together neatly. Now sew it together all the way around, starting at one side of the turning gap, all the way around the edge, and finishing at the other side of the turning gap. Now that's all sewn together neatly in place. Put your hand inside the lining. Grab hold of the bottom end of the bag outer and turn the whole bag right sides out through that turning gap. Undo the zip and put your hand inside the lining to push out all of the bottom corners and the darted edges, making sure the seam lies right on the edge. It's easier to do this before you sew the turning gap closed. Once that's done, push out the corners of the lining and fold the edges of the turning gap 1/4 inch to the inside and pin them together. Now top stitch this turning gap closed. Once that's done, push the lining inside the outer so the lining's lying nice and flat inside. Now arrange it so that the seam is lying exactly on the edge. Open up the zip and press it so the seam's lying on the edge all the way around, and then you're going to top stitch all the way around the edge, making sure you don't catch any of the ends of the zips in as you do that. Adding the zip tab. Once you've top stitched all around the edge of the bag, so it looks nice and neat, you're now going to add a zip tab to close the end of the zip. So close the zip and measure and mark 2 inches on the zip tape from the seam on the outside of the bag. Cut along the zip. This is why it's important the zips close. Cut all the way through to trim. You can work a few machine stitches across the end of the zip just to be sure it stays safe. Now, take the bag zip tab and fold all of the edges under by 1/2 inch to the wrong side and press. Now place the end of the zip. If you fold this in half at this point, you can see where you need to place the end of the zip. Just finger press that for now. Now place the end of the zip inside, so the end of the zip tape is by that centre crease, and then fold the whole zip tab on top, making sure those folded ends meet and the zip is sandwiched between them. Pin this into place, then top stitch into place all the way round. You've now got a neat zip that opens so that your bag will open fully when it's finished. Attaching the strap tabs. Take one of the back strap tabs you made earlier and fold the short ends under by 1/2 inch to the wrong side. Thread the D-ring through the strap tab, making sure the folded ends stay folded under and pin together. Now take your bag and measure 3/4 inch down from the top edge of one of the side seams. Doesn't matter which one, I'm using the open end here. Mark that with a pin. Now take your bag strap tab and place the folded under ends at that mark, making sure the strap tab is placed centrally across that side seam and the D-ring is facing upwards, and pin it into place. Now top stitch in a rectangle that bag strap into place on the edge of the bag, and repeat on the other side in exactly the same way, 3/4 inch from the top. Take care you don't sew through the ends of the zip as you do that. Now you've got the D-rings attached at either end of the bag. This is what you're going to attach the strap to in a moment. Attaching the strap. The strap is attached to the D-rings in the same way whether you're making the snap closure or the zip closure. Thread one end of the bag strap through one of the D-rings so it overlaps by 1 inch on the inside of the bag strap and pin it into place. Now making sure that the bag strap stays straight and isn't twisted by running it through your fingers, thread the other end of the bag strap up through one side of the slider and down through the other over the central bar. Thread the other short end through the other D-ring from the outside to the inside. Now pull the strap that goes through the slider up a bit so it's looped and out of the way. Thread the short end up through the inside of the slider, over the central bar and back down the other side. Overlap it to the bag strap by 1 inch and pin it into place. Now you need to stitch both strap ends in place with a rectangle so they're held securely together. Now you can easily adjust the slider to make your bag shorter, your bag strap shorter or longer, depending on how long you want it to sit on your shoulder. Your bag is now finished.